Hey, it's Silver. This is Kristala. So when I was offered a chance to take a very early look at a Souls-like, an up-and-coming new idea, I was like, yes, absolutely, I will do that. I would love to do that because I love looking at projects like this. But I should go ahead and mention right from the beginning that everything you're going to see in the background is very early. This game is not done cooking, not for a while. It's still got quite a ways to go. This is just an early playtest. It is not really fit for public consumption yet, and I mean, this game is so early that at the time I'm recording this, it doesn't even have a Steam page. So yeah, early days, but I wanted to show it off anyway because personally I think it's a really interesting project. I think it's actually quite an exciting project because it shows a lot of really good understanding of what the genre needs in order to succeed. So you play as an adorable cat person, and as an adorable cat person, you are pretty acrobatic. You know, you're fast on your feet, but the game isn't like Bloodborne speed. It's not quite that fast. But you are very easily capable of dodging around because this game doesn't actually have a stamina meter in the traditional sense. Instead, you have this balance gauge that appears whenever it's being used. It's that sort of yellowish gauge in the very bottom middle of the screen. And the way that this works is from blocking attacks and from dodging, you will deplete this gauge. And if it empties, you will be completely helpless for a small period of time, so you do not want that to happen. But doing various attacks and casting spells and stuff does not deplete this gauge, and I assume this mechanic is to encourage a lot of aggression, to make the combat a bit faster paced and not particularly defensive, and sort of keep you on your feet, moving around, counterattacking very often, that sort of thing. The game also has a bit of a focus on magic. You don't have to use it if you're one of those non-magic players that just prefers a very, very large piece of metal on a stick. You can still do that, but there are lots of different magic spells that are promised to be in the game, and the game very much caters towards using these a lot because you have a mana gauge that is just depleted from casting spells as normal, but it refills when you deal normal hits to enemies. So this means running out of mana is only a temporary thing because you can just recharge it by smacking dudes in the face. So as soon as you can't cast spells anymore, just smack a dude a couple times and there you go, you got your spellcasting back. So this is, I think, another thing that's meant to encourage a lot of aggression and variety in combat gameplay. And speaking of variety, this is definitely a high point of the game so far. You have quite a lot of different moves available to you at any given time. You have your traditional light attack combo, as well as a heavy attack and a chargeable heavy attack that's a bit different. You've got rolling attacks and your backsteps and stuff of that nature. You've also got jumping. I'm not sure if you have a jumping attack. I actually forgot to check, but I assume that if you don't right now, that is probably something they're going to add, considering the jump is sort of integral to the game's traversal mechanics. You've also got backstabs, parries, and ripostes, and you've got 4 spells that you can slot in at any given time, and 2 weapon arts that are going to be determined by the weapon you have equipped. So you put all this together, you got a lot of combat variety, you have a lot of different moves at your disposal, and that's a really nice thing, because I know that for some it is of course possible to make an action RPG's combat too complicated. I know some people point to games like Nioh 2 as an example that has so many moving parts in its combat that it's actually too complicated for them, and personally I actually really like Nioh 2's combat, but even though I like it, I still understand the criticism that there's a lot to it. Like, there's so much to keep track of. And although I like that, I'm also very understanding that that is definitely not for everyone, and you can in fact make action RPG combat too complicated. Too many bells and whistles will drive people away. And I think this game manages to strike a really good balance, a really nice medium in between simplicity and complexity, because you have quite a bit at your disposal, but a lot of it is optional, and a lot of it is also very easy to work into combos and things, and doesn't involve more complex things like stance changes and stuff like that. So that means the combat in this game is still complex and quite tactical feeling. It feels good, but it's not like a million moving parts at once kind of combat. There is also a stealth system, by the way. You can crouch at any time, and crouching is actually more useful for getting to areas that you couldn't otherwise get to, a lot of low, small passages and things like that. But you can also crouch in order to sneak, because, yeah, you can sneak up on enemies and backstab them, and I mentioned there is also parrying. The parrying is not actually on a button. You don't, like, press a parry button. Instead, you just block. You block as soon as an attack is about to hit you, and if you time it right, you will parry. This is a bit of a lower risk way to do parrying, because in the more traditional way where a parry is its own separate button, if you do it too early, then you're going to take a hit straight to the face. But in this game, if you do it too early, you'll still block the hit regardless, you just won't parry it. So it's definitely a lower risk parry, but it is an effective parry because the timing I've found is really good. I actually expected the parry timing to be a bit wonky because this is such an early build, and that's generally the kind of thing that is one of those finer mechanical details that's worked out later in development when you have more enemy types to test it on and things. But in this case, I found the parrying to be really responsive and really solid. Also, can I just say that the riposte animations that you do after a successful parry are all totally over the top and ridiculous, and I love them. They're really good animations. None of them are like a simple stab and push. One of them you actually stab an enemy, lift them up off the ground by the sword, and then roundhouse kick them across the arena. So yeah, they're all ridiculous, and they all fit this kind of acrobatic cat-like character that you are, so it makes sense. You also have your classic charge-based, Estus-like healing item. It's a crystal that you crush. It has a pretty fast animation, and it heals very quickly as well, so it's relatively low risk in combat, but it is not instant. It still has a use, very much like Bloodborne's Blood Vials. It's a quick animation, but it's still an animation, so you have to use it at an appropriate time. And yes, you do have stat leveling. You have this crystal energy stuff, this very pretty glowy stuff that you get from killing enemies, and you have these big crystal fountains that you can return to. These are your bonfires. They're pretty crystals floating over these ancient ruined fountains that I really like the look of. And yeah, those are your checkpoints that you return back to whenever you die and so forth, and you can spend this crystal energy there to improve your stats. And the stat leveling is another comparison to Bloodborne because it has fewer stats than something like Dark Souls, but not an overly simplified amount of stats. It's more like the Bloodborne amount that's kind of in between. So you have your sort of health stat, the stat that determines your maximum health. You've also got your strength and dexterity type of stats, and you've also got malediction and eminence, which are your magic stats. And although there's only a few spells and one weapon to try out in the playtest, at least that I found, you can still see the beginnings of what is going to clearly be a sort of stat scaling type of equipment idea, where you have different types of equipment that scales with your various stats, exactly like how you would think that the way that Dark Souls does it, the way that a lot of Souls-likes do it, because it's just a really good and effective way to determine your gear's stats. You have your strength weapons and your dexterity weapons and your quality weapons that are a bit of both and all that stuff. This game is very definitely going to take inspiration from that sort of thing and have their own version of it. But I think probably the reason I wanted to look at this the most, one of my favorite things to look at when it comes to new Souls-likes, even though I very much approve of combat variety and spell variety and all that stuff, I'm a big fan of looking at the world design and the overall level itself, because level design is one of those kind of ephemeral things in the Souls-like genre that is very difficult to nail down. It's often difficult to say exactly why the levels of something like Dark Souls are so beloved and so good, and how hard it can be to sort of capture that lightning for yourself. But I really like this sort of flooded, ruined village kind of idea that they have going on here, with a couple of cavern areas and some big fields and stuff as well, for good measure. It has a good flow to it. It's got a good sort of, you can tell where you're supposed to go and what is the optional path. It's pretty clearly marked. You can understand, because of the way that enemies are placed and stuff, they're signposted well so that you know what is progress and what is not. It also seems to open up very well for shortcuts and things. You'll find a lot of, one-way ramps and jumps you can make and stuff you can duck under and things of that nature, just in order to shortcut the areas or to go back to where you were, to find a quicker way back to the last fountain and some stuff like that. Things that you would expect, again, from this genre, but things that not everyone is able to nail down because some of this stuff is kind of complicated and a little bit hard to reproduce. But I found that this game shows a lot of competence in terms of what people expect from the Souls-like genre. There are a good number of details, even in an early build like this, that show me that there is a lot of competence in design when it comes to understanding what people like about Souls-likes, what people expect to be there, and how they're sort of supposed to work while still having your own identity. Little things, like a lot of out-of-the-way little huts are actually enterable, and they have loot in them, and they have various ways out back and stuff that sort of loop you back around to the main thoroughfare that you're supposed to be in more quickly than you actually got there, so as to sort of respect your time and show you that these shortcuts are really useful to look for. You've got other little things like the fact that the parry timing is already so well nailed down for the various enemy types that parrying already feels good. That shows a lot of competence in design, that's for sure. And there's also the idea that this game seems to be going for a relatively high enemy count for its areas, and this is always a danger because, well, enemies in Souls-likes have a sort of aggro radius, and it's sometimes really easy to not set these to a way that makes sense for the area that they're in, and have melees devolve into like these giant brawls where like half of the enemy gets aggroed when you walk into a big central location, and you're suddenly fighting like most of the level's worth of enemies all at once, and it's just a big huge mess. You know, in general, Souls-like design is supposed to be groups of enemies that are sort of discrete encounter groups that are meant to be encountered all together in a specific area. The areas of the map that you're in are just as important as the enemies themselves, because the composition of the enemies sort of works together with the layout of the area to have an encounter that makes sense and is enjoyable. So when too many enemies get involved in a melee like this, it just becomes a hard to read mess that isn't as satisfying. And I found that even in this playtest, these enemies are actually pretty good at that. They have a lot of tuning in respect to aggro distances and things to make sure that even in areas with a large number of enemies, you don't just walk into a gate and suddenly there are like 15 of them that instantly know where you are. Even when you're fighting, you tend to be able to pull discrete groups of enemies as individual encounters instead of having a big, messy brawl throughout the entire place, sort of all over the place everywhere. And that sort of more careful and deliberate encounter design mixed with the pretty good area design is exactly the sort of indicator that I look for, that the people involved who are designing these things know exactly what they're doing, and they know very well how this genre works and how to make it work for them. So I'm always excited when I see a project like this because I love seeing people that are clearly passionate about what they're making, creative people that know exactly what they want to do, and they have a lot of heart and a lot of soul put into their work because it's something that they genuinely love and understand, and they want to make their own version of, and that's exactly what this feels like. If I had to come up with a complaint, just so it doesn't sound like I'm gushing over this too much, then I would say that the boss fight at the end of the playtest is too easy. It's very easy. Although, I mean, come on, it's just one first and only boss in a playtest, so I didn't expect it to be mega complicated. But still, I may as well mention that, yeah, it was a little bit easy, and honestly, the main way to remedy this is to do one of my other favorite aspects of Souls-like design, which is to make sure that bosses have a very good variety of attack patterns for you to learn how to dodge. Make sure your bosses don't just have 2 or 3 attacks. Make sure they have like 6 or 7 attacks that the player has to learn each, and the boss can mix them together in different ways to keep the player on their toes, stuff like that. But yeah, my current look at Kristala is that it's a very promising project from a group of people that are clearly very passionate and knowledgeable about what they're doing and have some really neat ideas. I like the spell upgrade system, by the way. The spell upgrade system is kind of cool because we're used to weapon upgrade systems, and this game does have that, but it also has a separate upgrading system for making your spells stronger with their own resource, which is a really cool idea because like spell progression in Souls-likes is generally done by getting new spells, not by making your current ones more powerful. Oh, and there is one other thing I want to mention because I couldn't actually show it because it's not currently in the playtest, but it is something that they're promising, and they have a menu for it and everything. Basically, you're going to have more of like a Metroidvania way to get around, which is pretty common for Souls-likes, but the way that it works is it looks like you're going to be able to get various resources from around the world and spend these resources on a sort of tree of skills that are all based around traversal and movement and unlocking new areas and unlocking new ways to do things. I think this is a really cool idea, and this is actually one of the things that excites me the most about the full version of this game. I want to see that fleshed out. I want to see how that works, because the idea of having these like Metroidvania traversal modes that you can unlock with a sort of resource-based upgrade tree sounds like a lot of fun, and it sounds like it could open up a lot of really cool avenues for having a very interesting world to explore that's very rewarding to explore because you are able to return to areas constantly and find new things because you're upgrading yourself to be able to reach new things all the time. So yeah, that's a quick look at a very early build of Kristala. Definitely an exciting project and something that I'm going to be keeping a very close eye on. Hopefully in the future I'll be able to bring you some more, maybe some more early builds, maybe some beta stuff, maybe even eventually some release stuff. Hopefully this game does well and on its Kickstarter and things and is able to reach that point, because I really want to see this succeed. I want to see it come out and I want to see it fully realized in its finished form, because I have a feeling it's going to be one of those really cool indie takes at this genre that is quite difficult to get into for people. So yeah, thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.